Na Fenure, Dung Touch, Dung Kamasin Tron, Morgan, Paige, Clover, Declan, Renata, Cole, Sloan, Faye, Farrar, Brittanda, Tharana Fa, Cole Sloan, Thara, Brittanta Ten, Anon Faye, Tapateman, and Hapa, Bu, Boba, Theodansach. Toi Supanhenha, Tapate, Tapanhamasan. He stood up at my mother's retirement dinner, tapped his knife against his water glass twice, and announced to the whole table that he was the one handling her finances now. Not a question, not a conversation, a declaration, loud enough that the couple at the next table glanced over, and everyone at ours smiled like he'd just said something generous. Mom didn't smile. Her hand found her napkin, and she pressed it flat against the table. Once, slowly, the way she does when she's deciding whether to speak or let something pass. She let it pass. I watched her make that choice and felt something cold settle in my chest, because I already knew what he didn't know. I knew. The credit union had called me 4 days earlier. Tell me something. If you found out someone in your family had been slowly helping themselves to your parents' savings, what would you do? Would you say something at the dinner table, in front of everyone? Or would you wait for the right moment, knowing it might never come? My name is Nadia. I'm the younger one, which in my family has always meant the quieter one. Not shy, just strategic. I learned early that in our house, my brother Owen got to have opinions out loud. I had to earn the right to mine. Owen is 6 years older than me, which meant that by the time I was 12, he was already being treated like a junior adult at family gatherings. He had thoughts about the stock market. He had plans. Mom and Dad nodded along like everything he said was reasonable simply because he said it with confidence. I spent years watching that trick work and never quite mastering it myself. What I mastered instead was the follow-through. When Dad got sick 3 years ago, Owen called every week from Portland with advice. I drove 40 minutes each way, twice a week, to take Dad to his appointments. When he passed, Owen flew in for the service and flew out 4 days later. I stayed and helped Mom sort through the paperwork, the insurance forms, the accounts, the subscriptions she didn't know she was still paying for. That's the kind of help that doesn't get announced at dinner. It just happens, quietly, while someone else is already on their way home. Mom and I had developed a rhythm after Dad died. She'd call me on Tuesday and Thursday evenings, usually after the news. We'd talk through whatever was bothering her, a bill that looked wrong, a letter from Medicare she didn't understand, a neighbor who kept parking too close to her mailbox. Small things, but she needed someone to talk them through with, and I was always there. Then sometime last spring, I started noticing her repeat herself within the same call. Not once, but twice, 3 times. She'd ask about my job, I'd answer, and 20 minutes later, she'd ask again with the same curiosity, like we hadn't just covered it. I mentioned it gently to Owen on the phone one night. He laughed a little and said, "She's just lonely, Nadia. Don't catastrophize." I let it go. He always made me feel like I was looking for problems that weren't there, but I kept a quiet record. Nothing dramatic, just mental notes. The repeated questions. The moment at Easter when she couldn't remember whether she'd taken her medication and asked me 4 times in an hour. The afternoon she called me by my aunt's name, caught herself, laughed it off. Small things that added up to something I didn't have a name for yet. Then the credit union called. I was in the middle of grading papers. I teach 7th grade English in Asheville, and my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail. I'm glad I didn't. The woman on the line was polite, careful with her words, the way people are when they're about to tell you something difficult. She said she was calling on behalf of my mother's account, that I was listed as an emergency contact, and that there had been some activity she wanted to confirm was authorized. She described 3 transfers over 6 weeks. Significant amounts. Each one described as family assistance in the memo line. Each one landing in an account that wasn't my mother's. She asked if my mother had discussed any of this with me. I said no. She asked if I could look into it and call back within 48 hours. I said yes. I hung up and sat at my kitchen table for a long time without moving. I wasn't surprised. That was the worst part. I wasn't even surprised. Mom's retirement party was my aunt's idea. Her sister, Ruthie, who lives in Brevard and drives an hour for any excuse to host something. Mom had worked as an office administrator for the same dental practice for 22 years. She was finally stepping back, and Ruthie wanted to market. 12 people around a long table at a restaurant in downtown Asheville, with candles and a cake that said, "She did it," in mint green frosting. I had planned to talk to Mom before the dinner. I'd written out how I'd bring it up. Soft, no accusations, just questions. I wanted to give her the chance to tell me herself before I had to show her what I'd already found. But the week ran away from me between parent conferences and a field trip I'd forgotten I'd agreed to chaperone, and suddenly it was Saturday night and I was walking into the restaurant with everything still unsaid. Owen was already there when I arrived. He'd flown in from Portland that afternoon, which surprised me. He didn't usually make it for things like this. He was at the bar, drink in hand, in a blazer that probably cost more than my bi-weekly paycheck. He hugged me the way he always does. One arm, quick pat on the back, already looking past me to see who else had arrived. The dinner started well. Mom looked genuinely happy. She was wearing her pearl earrings, the ones she saves for occasions, and her cheeks were pink from the wine and the warmth of the room. She laughed at Ruthie's toasts and squeezed hands with the women she'd worked with for decades. I watched her from across the table and felt the familiar ache of wanting to protect someone from something they don't yet know is coming. It happened between the entrees and the dessert. Owen stood up. He didn't tap his glass. He just stood, and the table quieted because Owen has always had that gravity, that assumption of an audience. He smiled his easy smile and started talking about how proud he was of Mom, how hard she'd worked, how she deserved this next chapter. People nodded. Ruthie pressed her hand to her heart. And then he pivoted, smooth as anything, into something no one had asked him to say. "I want everyone to know," he said, hand on Mom's shoulder, "that she's completely taken care of. I've been managing her accounts for the last few months. She doesn't have to worry about a thing." Smiles around the table, a few "aw-wahs." Ruthie actually clapped once, and Owen stood there absorbing it the way he always had, like approval was something he was simply owed. Mom's smile went a little stiff. It was subtle, the kind of thing only I would catch, because I'd spent 31 years watching her face. Her eyes dropped to the table for just a moment before she recovered and nodded along. She looked like someone who had just been spoken for and couldn't quite figure out the polite way to object. I didn't say anything. Not yet. I held the credit union's call behind my eyes like a stone I was carrying and reminded myself that this wasn't the place. But I also noted the exact words he used. Not helping Mom with her accounts. Not, we've been sorting things out together. He said managing. He said she doesn't have to worry. Like she'd handed him something, and the rest of us were just supposed to be grateful. The dinner wound down. Cake was cut. Photos were taken. Owen posed with his arm around Mom in almost every one of them. I hugged her at the end of the night, held on a beat longer than usual, and she whispered, "Thank you for coming, sweetheart," into my hair. Like I was a guest. Like I hadn't been the one calling twice a week for the last 2 years. In the parking lot, Owen caught up with me as I was unlocking my car. "She doing okay?" he asked. Casual. Hands in his pockets. "You tell me," I said. "You're the one managing things." He heard something in my voice. His eyes sharpened a little. "Is there a problem?" "Not tonight," I said. "I got in my car. I drove home. I pulled everything out at my kitchen table that night." I had copies of some of Mom's statements from a filing trip we'd done together in January, when she'd asked me to help her organize the year's paperwork. I laid them out alongside the dates the credit union had given me and worked through the math slowly. The transfers matched up with periods when Owen had been visiting or, in one case, when he'd been in town for a cousin's wedding and had taken Mom to lunch. There was also a form, a limited power of attorney for financial matters that Mom had apparently signed in February. I found it photographed in her email, which she'd asked me to help her set up on her new tablet. The signature was hers, but the date was February 14th, a Sunday. Mom doesn't do paperwork on Sundays. She goes to church and comes home and watches old movies. She'd told me once that Dad used to say Sundays were for resting, not deciding. I didn't sleep well that night. Not because I was angry, though I was, but because I kept seeing Mom's face at the dinner table when Owen said she didn't have to worry. That flicker of something she swallowed before she smiled. I drove to her house Sunday morning. She lives in a small ranch house in Weaverville, about 25 minutes from me. She was on the porch with her coffee when I pulled up. which meant she'd either been expecting me or she'd wanted some air and couldn't sleep either. "You didn't call first," she said. "Not a complaint, an observation." "I know." I sat down in the other porch chair. "I wanted to talk to you before anyone else got here." She looked at me for a moment, then looked at her coffee. "Owen's coming by at 11. "I know," I said again. "That's why I came at 9. She was quiet. A cardinal landed in the bird bath at the edge of the yard, and she watched it like it was the most interesting thing happening. "Mom," I said carefully, "the credit union called me this week." She didn't react the way I expected. She didn't startle or go pale. She just closed her eyes, very briefly, like someone who had been waiting for a knock at the door and was both dreading and relieved it had finally come. "What did they say?" she asked. I told her. All of it. The transfers, the amounts, the dates, the power of attorney form I'd found. I kept my voice even. I wasn't there to make her feel guilty for trusting him. I was there to make sure she understood what she'd trusted him with. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. The cardinal flew away. "He said it was to cover some expenses," she said finally. "Medical things from when your father was sick. He said there were bills I didn't know about." "Dad's estate was settled 18 months ago," I said. "I helped you close every account." She pressed her lips together. "I know." "Did you ask him for documentation?" She didn't answer. Which was its own answer. We heard a car before we saw it. Owen's rental pulling into the driveway, a full 90 minutes earlier than he'd said. He got out looking relaxed, holding a coffee from somewhere. Sunglasses pushed up on his head. He stopped when he saw both of us on the porch. Something passed across his face, quick, like a shadow, before the easy smile came back. "Hey," he said. "Didn't know you'd be here, Nadia." "I came to see Mom," I said. He came up the steps and kissed her on the cheek and looked at the two of us sitting there and seemed to make a calculation. "What's going on?" "We were talking about the transfers," I said. The smile didn't fall away all at once. It just sort of thinned, like paper held up to the light. "What transfers?" he said. Flat. Not a question. "The 3 from Mom's savings account. February, March, and April." I kept my eyes on his. "The credit union flagged them." "They called you?" Something shifted in his posture. "I'm her emergency contact." Owen turned to Mom. "You gave them her number." "Your father set it up years ago," Mom said quietly. "I never changed it." He looked back at me. When he spoke again, his voice had taken on the tone he used when he was explaining something to someone he found slightly exhausting. "Those were reimbursements, Nadia. For expenses I fronted when I was here in the fall. I talked to Mom about it." "You talked to me once," Mom said. Her voice was soft. "I don't remember agreeing to 3 separate amounts." Owen blinked. "Mom, I showed you the receipts." "You showed me something on your phone," she said. "I couldn't see it well." There it was, the crack. Small, but I felt the whole structure shift around it. "The power of attorney," I said. "She signed it on a Sunday." "She signed it when she was ready to sign it. She doesn't do paperwork on Sundays." "You know that. I don't need a lecture on Mom's habits from you," he said. And now the pleasant veneer was gone, and I could see the irritation underneath, the genuine belief that I was being unreasonable, that I was inserting myself into something that didn't belong to me. "I'm not lecturing you," I said. "I'm asking you to explain." "I don't have to explain anything. I'm her son." "And I'm her daughter." I reached into the folder I'd brought and set the printed statements on the porch table. "And the credit union is asking her to explain. So we're going to need answers either way." Owen stared at the papers. His jaw moved once, like he was chewing something he'd decided not to swallow. Mom leaned forward and looked at the statements herself. She studied them for longer than I expected. Then she picked up the one from April and held it close to her face, squinting slightly. "This one," she said. "I didn't know about this one." "Mom," Owen started. "I didn't know about this one, Owen." Her voice was still soft, but it had changed. There was a clarity in it I hadn't heard since before Dad died. "How much in total?" He didn't answer. "How much?" she said again. He named a number, smaller than the actual number. I watched him say it and knew immediately it was wrong because I had the real one written on the notepad inside my folder. "That's not what the credit union told me," I said. Owen's head turned toward me slowly. The actual total, I said, is higher. I can show you. He stood up. Both hands went to his hips. You know your problem is? You've always needed to be the one who saves everything. You've been waiting for a chance to make me look bad. I've been answering her calls twice a week for 2 years, I said. I was there when she couldn't remember if she'd taken her medication. I drove her to the cardiologist in January because you couldn't get a flight. This isn't about looking bad, Owen. This is about what happened to her money. Mom was looking at him, not at me, at him. She's listed on the account, he said, as a contact. That doesn't make her the authority here. No, I said, but it made me the one they called. And what I found, I pulled out the last document, the power of attorney form printed and dated. This was signed on a Sunday morning in February. Can you tell me what you needed authorized so urgently on a Sunday that it couldn't wait until Monday? His face went very still. Mom reached out and took the paper from me. She looked at it. Her handwriting, her signature, her name typed neatly below it. She looked for a long time. I signed something, she said slowly. You came over and you said it was just a formality. You said it was in case something happened to me and you needed to handle things quickly. That's what it is, he said. You didn't tell me it covered my savings accounts. Mom, you said it was a formality. Her voice cracked on the last word. Not with sadness, with something harder. Owen tried again. Softer now, the big brother voice he'd used my entire life when he needed someone to agree with him. I was trying to help you. You've been overwhelmed since Dad died. I didn't want you to have to manage everything alone. I wasn't managing alone, Mom said. She looked at me for the first time since Owen had arrived. Nadia was here. 3 words. They didn't feel like a victory. They felt like the truth finally locating a place to land. Owen turned away from both of us and stood at the edge of the porch for a moment, looking out at the yard. When he turned back, his face had settled into something colder. So what now? You report me to the bank? Turn this into some big thing? That depends on what you're willing to do, I said. The credit union has already started a review. What happens next is partly up to you. His eyes went to Mom. You're really going to do this? She looked at him steadily. I want the money returned. Whatever amount came out that I didn't authorize, I want it back. And the power of attorney, I said, she's revoking it. You can't just… Yes, Mom said quietly. I can. He left without saying goodbye. The rental car backed out of the driveway too fast, and the tires made a sound on the asphalt that seemed to say everything he hadn't. Mom and I sat on the porch for a while after that without speaking. The morning had gone warm. Somewhere down the street, someone was running a lawnmower. I should have asked more questions, she said finally. He counted on you not to, I said. That's not the same as you doing something wrong. She nodded slowly. Will the bank be difficult? I'll call them tomorrow and walk you through everything. We'll get an attorney involved if we need to. I paused. But Mom, I also want to talk to you about the other thing. The questions you've been repeating. The medication confusion. I think we should get you evaluated. Not because something's wrong, maybe nothing is, but I want to know. She looked at her hands. Your father would have said the same thing. I know. She reached over and patted my hand once, the way she used to when I was small and worried about something she knew she couldn't fix. All right, she said. Let's find out. The credit union moved carefully once Mom made the formal request. An investigator was assigned within a week. Owen returned a portion of the money before the investigation concluded. Not all of it, and not without pushback, but enough that Mom's attorney advised her it was a reasonable starting point while the rest was being disputed. The power of attorney was formally revoked. Mom had a new document drawn up. One she read line by line sitting at her own kitchen table on a Tuesday morning with her reading glasses on and her coffee at her elbow, and me across from her with a notepad in case she had questions. Owen called twice in the weeks that followed. Mom answered the first time. I don't know what he said. She didn't tell me, and I didn't ask. She just said afterward, he thinks I'm being dramatic. She said it without bitterness, more like she was filing it away somewhere, updating something she'd held on to about him for a long time. The evaluation came back with findings we weren't entirely surprised by. Early changes in memory function, mild but worth monitoring. Her doctor was kind about it. He said the earlier she understood it and began adapting, the more control she'd have over her own life. She cried a little on the drive home. I let her. I didn't try to reframe it or make it smaller. Sometimes things are exactly as hard as they feel, and the kindest thing is not to pretend otherwise. I still drive out on Tuesdays and Thursdays. We still drink tea in her kitchen. She still asks about my students and remembers the names of the difficult ones I've mentioned before. Some things are still exactly what they've always been, but something else is different now too. She signs her own paperwork on her own schedule. She asks questions when she's unsure. She called the credit union herself last month to ask about a charge and sorted it out without me. When she hung up, she sounded like herself in a way she hadn't in years, clear, settled, capable. She told me afterward, I forgot I still knew how to do that. I said, you always did. She said, you should have let me be reminded sooner. Maybe. But we were both learning, in our own ways, how to stop letting other people's confidence replace our own. If someone in your family has ever made themselves indispensable to someone you love, and you felt the ground shifting and didn't know how to name it, I want to hear from you. Leave it in the comments, and stay with me. I've been sitting with this story for a while now, turning it over the way you turn a stone in your hand. Not looking for anything specific, just noticing the weight of it. What happened with Owen wasn't a single terrible decision. That's the part that took me the longest to understand. It was a series of small ones, each one just comfortable enough that he kept going. He told himself he was helping. He probably even believed it, at least at first. That's how these things work, not with a villain's announcement, but with a quiet justification that compounds over time until the person making it has forgotten they were ever doing anything wrong. And my mother, for her part, trusted him because he asked her to. That's what trust is. It's not naivety. It's a gift you extend to someone based on who you believe they are. Owen had spent a lifetime presenting himself as capable, as the one who figured things out, as the person in the room worth listening to. Mom gave him that trust because he'd spent years earning the appearance of deserving it. The problem wasn't that she trusted. The problem was that he spent that trust on himself. What I keep coming back to is this: the cost of staying quiet is never zero. I noticed the repeated questions. I noticed the medication confusion. I noticed when her voice went careful around him in a way it didn't around me. And for a long time I filed those things away and told myself I was being cautious. I was actually being afraid. Afraid of being wrong, afraid of making things harder, afraid of being the one who stirred something that everyone else preferred to leave still. Owen counted on that. Not because he knew me well enough to calculate it, but because people who take advantage of others almost always rely on the silence of the people who notice. They count on the considerate ones to stay considerate a little too long. The credit union's call gave me something I hadn't been able to manufacture on my own, a clear reason to act. And that's the thing I think about most when I replay those weeks. I didn't need the call to know something was wrong. I already knew. What I needed was permission to stop pretending I didn't. I think about Mom on that porch, eyes closed when I told her what the credit union said. She'd been waiting too, in her own way, carrying her own version of something she couldn't quite name. She'd signed a form on a Sunday morning, and some part of her had known even then that something wasn't right, and had trusted the wrong person's reassurance over her own instinct. She's different now, not because the hard thing is over, but because she stopped handing her own judgment to someone else for safekeeping. She calls the credit union herself. She reads the forms, she asks the questions she used to wave off, because asking them felt like admitting she didn't already know. That's not weakness she's recovering from. That's strength she's reclaiming. And Owen, I don't know exactly where he lands in all of this. People who do harm and get caught tend to spend a long time insisting the harm wasn't as bad as everyone said. He'll have to reckon with that in his own time, in his own way. What I know is that the money is being returned, the power of attorney is revoked, and my mother is signing her own name, on her own schedule, on her own terms. But you do with the things you notice. That's the whole story, every time.